Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your tap has run completely dry, not in some distant forgotten desert, but right in the heart of a massive city of 5 million people. This is not a distant nightmare for the residents of Phoenix, but a terrifying reality that they are desperately racing to prevent as the clock continues its relentless countdown towards zero. The Colorado River, a vital lifeline stretching 1,450 miles from the snowy Rocky Mountains to the Gulf, is currently collapsing in front of our very eyes. Lake Mead has plummeted to historic lows, while the groundwater reserves that should have lasted for many decades are now depleting at a speed that can only be described as terrifying. Yet despite these warnings, Phoenix continues to build and expand, acting as if the water will never stop flowing, even though the structural collapse of the entire system is nearly here. I am investigating what happens when a modern metropolis loses its ancient river, uncovering hidden vulnerabilities and the engineering systems currently on life support, while families lose everything they owned. Within the next 10 years, Arizona will be forced to face a brutal choice that is already being made for them by the harsh and unforgiving reality of a changing climate. For those 5 million people living in the desert, water is no longer a luxury, but has become as essential as the very oxygen they breathe to survive in this heat. Phoenix exists solely because of the Colorado River, which delivers roughly 2,660,000 acre-feet of water every single year to the entire thirsty region. Picture an acre-foot covering one entire acre of land 1 foot deep, and then imagine that massive volume vanishing from the river every year without any chance of being replaced. The Central Arizona Project is the engineering marvel that made this modern city possible, a 336-mile canal system pumping water uphill over 1,100 feet. Without this vital flow, the agricultural engine shuts down, the massive data centers powering our cloud economy go dark, and the very heart of the Phoenix metropolitan area simply ceases to exist. The Central Arizona Project delivers about 1,500,000 acre-feet of water annually to the Phoenix metropolitan area, supporting rural communities and massive agricultural regions across the entire state. This engineering marvel is the 4th largest source of water in Arizona, and without its constant flow, the agricultural engine that feeds the entire region would simply shut down forever. Even the modern data centers that power our global cloud economy would go dark without the water provided by this system, yet its very foundations are built on shifting sand. Here is the secret they never told the public. The entire system was built on water flow assumptions calculated back in 1968, assuming the river would always stay high. That optimistic assumption has now completely collapsed as Lake Mead, the massive reservoir behind the Hoover Dam that stores our lifeblood, reveals the true scale of this slow-motion disaster today. In 1983, when the lake filled completely, its surface sat at an elevation of 1,229 feet, representing the maximum capacity the engineers intended. Today, the water level has plummeted to just 1,062 feet and continues falling rapidly, marking a staggering drop of 167 feet from its peak. To visualize this loss, imagine a massive building 55 stories high, and then watch as the water level drops all the way down past the 40th floor in total silence. The white mineral line left behind, known as the bathtub ring, tells a tragic story of decades of drought, rising temperatures, and a level of demand that is simply unsustainable. This visual scar marks a historic crisis where Arizona experienced a Tier 1 shortage declaration in 2022, which was then repeated in 2023 and 2024. The trend shows no signs of stopping, with Tier 1 shortages continuing through 2025 for the 4th consecutive year and projected to remain throughout 2026. Every single year the lake falls below the critical threshold of 1,075 feet, automatic cuts are triggered, and Arizona is forced to lose more water. This is where the situation becomes truly insane, because Arizona absorbs the vast majority of those deep cuts, despite being home to 5 million people and the fastest-growing city. Thousands of new data centers and massive residential developments take the deepest hit as the state struggles to balance its explosive growth against a rapidly vanishing supply of water. Tom Bushchatsky, the director of water resources, has warned state legislatures about a new paradigm where significantly less Colorado River water will be the new permanent baseline for everyone. The current operational guidelines established in 2007 are set to expire at the very end of 2026, which is a deadline that is approaching quickly. Federal negotiations will soon determine exactly how much water Arizona will receive for the next 20 years, and the current projections for the state are nothing short of brutal. Arizona could face up to 760,000 acre-feet in additional cuts on top of the 512,000 acre-feet it is already losing annually. This is the difference between sustaining the current population and forcing a radical contraction that will change the face of the entire American Southwest forever as we know it. Arizona's engineers have built something truly extraordinary, but it is an entire civilization existing on borrowed time while the state pumps ancient groundwater at rates far exceeding any natural replenishment. Satellite data from NASA reveals an alarming scale of loss, showing that between 2002 and 2024, the Colorado River Basin lost 27.8 million acre-feet. About 68% of that massive water loss occurred in the lower basin, which sits mostly in Arizona, marking the disappearance of a resource that took millennia to accumulate. Groundwater provides more than 40% of Arizona's total water supply, which is more than the Colorado River itself, but it is being withdrawn 4 times faster than nature replenishes. Arizona has a law called the 100-year water adequacy requirement, meaning developers must prove they have access to a century of water before they can build any new subdivisions. But the math is now collapsing, as new models found that the Phoenix active management area is running 4% short of its 100-year water adequacy requirement today. That 4% sounds small until you realize there is simply not enough water under Phoenix to sustain current development patterns for the next century, causing a massive construction freeze. Close to 470,000 proposed housing units in Arizona are now on hold or frozen because developers can no longer prove they have access to 100 years. The Home Builders Association is currently suing the state, and politicians are trying to pass exemptions, but the geology does not negotiate, and the aquifers simply will not compromise with anyone. Phoenix's population is still growing rapidly despite the mega drought, with projections suggesting the state will add 3 million more people by the year 2035 in this water crisis. That represents a 40% growth in a single decade during a water crisis, where water is the limiting factor for survival, not the availability of land for new buildings. The Rio Verde foothills situation in 2023 gave us a terrifying preview of what is coming when the city of Scottsdale suddenly cut off the water supply for residents. Residents depended on water trucks that were no longer coming, forcing families to take showers at gyms or wash their babies with bottled water while their green lawns turned to dust. Eventually, a Canadian utility company spent $10 million to build a new pipeline, but this expensive reactive model breaks down when it affects 5 million people instead of only 1,500. In Pinal County, the agricultural heartland of Arizona, the cuts are even severe as farmers face an 87% reduction in surface water, forcing them to make impossible choices. Farmers like David are leaving 50% of their fields dry in 2025 as their neighbors sell their land to corporations or simply walk away from a lost life. This agricultural abandonment reduces food production in one of America's most productive regions, forcing us to depend on other places with more water that might also be running dry. Hydrologist Kevin Wheeler projects that the Colorado River Basin will soon enter a period of permanent deficit, meaning that the water flowing in will never meet the demand year after year. Climate change is responsible for about 40% of the current deficit, according to research from multiple universities, as hotter temperatures mean snowpack melts much earlier than it ever did. The Southwest has warmed by 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the early 1900s, which is roughly double the global average, and that warming is now completely baked into our environment. Phoenix is building 3 massive water recycling plants using advanced technology to purify treated wastewater through ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis to meet all of the federal drinking water quality standards. The Cave Creek plant is under construction now and expected to be operational by 2029, while the North Gateway plant will receive $179 million in federal investment. By 2030, these combined plants might supply only 10 to 15% of Phoenix's domestic water needs, leaving the remaining 85% still dependent on the river and groundwater. In November 2025, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority approved multiple desalination proposals, which take salty water and remove the minerals to produce clean drinking water for the growing desert population. But desalination is incredibly expensive, costing roughly $2,000 per acre-foot compared to only $200 to $500 for traditional water sources that the state currently relies on. This process is also extremely energy-intensive, requiring massive solar farms in the desert to power the reverse osmosis membranes, creating another infrastructure project that competes for capital and land. The real solution, according to every hydrologist, is a massive reduction in demand, requiring cities to reduce consumption and agriculture to shift toward crops that are much less water-intensive. Turf grass lawns in the desert, which are among the most water-intensive landscaping choices possible, need to be replaced with native plants and hardscape to align with the actual water supply. Politically, this is nearly impossible because the construction industry funds major campaigns and real estate interests shape the policy for growth, tax revenue, and political support throughout the entire state. State officials claim that new supply solutions like cloud seeding and aquifer recharge will bridge the gap, but these technologies are not magic and cannot solve a 25% structural deficit. The Cap Canal itself is a massive vulnerability, as thousands of acre-feet of water evaporate from the open sections every year, while the aging concrete structure requires constant and expensive maintenance. A major break, a seismic event, or even a deliberate attack could interrupt the supply, while agricultural runoff and high salinity reduce the quality of the water before it ever reaches Phoenix. Federal models suggest that Lake Mead could hit the critical 1,000-foot threshold by mid-2026, and when it does, the water cuts will not be incremental but severe. A water engineer recently stated that the entire water system in Phoenix is built on a house of cards, and we are currently pulling cards out of the bottom every single day. The physics of this situation is not negotiable, and if the Colorado River can only supply a fraction of what is needed, then someone in the lower basin is going to lose. What keeps me up at night is the sheer speed of this change, as the Colorado River's flow was stable for a century, but is now declining year after year. Wildfires in the headwaters are becoming more frequent due to warming, further reducing the snowpack and water yields that 5 million people depend on for their very survival. The current operational guidelines expire in 2026, and the agreement that follows will shape water availability for every resident and business for the next 20 years to come. Arizona's water officials are negotiating hard with other states, but the physics of the situation is not negotiable when the river simply cannot provide what everyone is demanding. The human cost is often invisible until it is too late, like David the farmer deciding which fields to abandon, knowing his children will never inherit the family farm. It is a family in Tempe wondering if their home's resale value is about to collapse because of water uncertainty, while new housing units exist only as useless blueprints. An entire economic model built on endless expansion is hitting a geological wall, and the assumption that everything will work out is deeply embedded in the regional culture today. When Lake Mead drops below 1,025 feet, Tier 3 shortages hit, triggering massive cuts to the canal supply that nobody truly knows how to handle. Arizona must choose between a managed decline where the city stabilizes or an unmanaged collapse where businesses flee and property values crash as water uncertainty deepens for everyone. History shows that most regions choose the collapse because the political window for action narrows, while the aquifers drop deeper and the momentum for growth remains far too high. The next 5 years are critical for Phoenix, requiring collective action and structural economic change that goes far beyond taking shorter showers or planting a few desert cacti. When 5 million people share the same disappearing water supply, individual choices matter less than the systemic policy choices made by state officials during Yingdutnamthat Lianbag Nai. If you live in Phoenix today, you are living through the early stages of a transformation that most people do not fully understand until the taps finally stop running. Understanding the crisis is the first step toward preparing for what comes next, so grab your disaster preparedness toolkit to help navigate the regional drought scenarios in Arizona. The stakes have never been higher for the survival of this modern civilization built on the fragile promises of a river that is now quickly fading away into history. The clock is running out for the desert metropolis, and the choices made today will determine if Phoenix remains a place where 5 million people can actually call home. The Phoenix of 2035 will look radically different than it does today, as the limits of nature finally override the ambitions of men in this sun-scorched desert. Every drop of water in Arizona is now a precious currency that we can no longer afford to waste on the illusions of infinite growth and endless expansion. The year 2026 will be the ultimate test of human engineering and political will as the river continues its silent retreat from the thirsty cities. We must decide now if we are brave enough to embrace a new way of living before the desert reclaims what we have built on borrowed time. This is not just a story about a dry city, but a global warning for every modern civilization that has forgotten the fundamental limits of our planet. Stay informed, stay prepared, and remember that the future of Phoenix is currently being written by the choices we make in these final critical months. Subscribe to join our investigation into the changing world and let us witness together how humanity navigates the greatest environmental challenge of our generation. The clock has not stopped ticking for the 5 million people of the desert, and every second counts as the water levels continue to fall into darkness.